Time is an illusion that has permeated our day-to-day sense of self, our day-to-day sense of reality. It's on automatic pilot. We look around, we interact with the elements and the people in our lives, and we automatically project ourselves into a temporal location, a sense of having a location within the meaning of time, within our interpretation of time. Let's now see specifically how this principle will help you in your deconstruction, which equates to your liberation from time. Hello, can everybody hear me? Wonderful. I just briefly check if they can also see and hear me on the live stream outside of Zoom. Okay, friends, welcome so much. If that's a thing, welcome so much. I hope you had a great day. Very much welcome. Nice to see you all. All right, my friends, let's take a brief 2 to 5 second moment of mental cutting through the mind into the awareness that lies right beneath it, that illuminates the mind, that enables it to even be known in the first place. That light of awareness which knows your mind. And so by taking a deep breath and relaxing on the exhalation, your thoughts, cutting through the thoughts with this pristine clarity of your own presence, you can then, in this intensified moment of presence, recognize your own light, your own presence, your own awareness that much more vividly. So take a few moments like that, where you cut through the mind and into the lucid substratum of aware being. Meet you there. All right, wonderful, blissful, thank you. So today, I'm going to be reading 2 chapters from my book as part of a larger chapter with many subchapters. The larger chapter is called Deconstructing Time. Time is an illusion that has permeated, that has infiltrated our day-to-day sense of self, our day-to-day sense of reality. It's on automatic pilot. We look around, we interact with the elements and the people in our lives, and we automatically project ourselves into a temporal location, a sense of having a location within the meaning of time, within our interpretation of time. The 2 chapters in particular I want to share with you are a bit more technical in their nature, in their exposition, because they are based off of a quantum mechanics principle. But I thought it'd be fun to try this route with you guys. And once the book is out, which shouldn't be too long from now, you will be able to reread this and go over it at your own pace. But I hope that this analogy, this model, this quantum physics model will help you in your deconstruction, which equates to your liberation from time, to where your sense of I am, your sense of I exist, your sense of I, of being, is no longer clouded by these interpretations of time. or at least that at will you can see through the illusion of time whenever you remember to do so. This can be very liberating and clarifying. So, I will open my book, my phone. Let me see, is any more context needed here? I don't think so. It's fairly self-explanatory, which is the purpose of the way that I write. So I hope this resonates for you and that it sinks in. Always remember, though, that logic is useful for self-realization, for awakening, if applied properly, if the logic is a higher logic, for lack of a better word. Because self-realization is, in my opinion, a science. It's a practicable science. It's an art, but it's also scientific in its fundamentals and in how we can approach it. It's not the same as the fluffy type of spirituality where everything goes and everybody sees unicorns and blue lights and floating obstacles or divine entities and burns incense. All of that is fine if that works for you, but at the end of the day, self-realization is a science that is practicable. So that's my intention to adhere to throughout this book. All right, so 2 chapters. The first is titled The Path of Least Action, a Quantum Physics Analogy. Note, keep in mind, I am not a quantum physicist, so my representation here may not be accurate according to established quantum physicists and their language, terms, observations, etc. But I will do my best to translate, bridge, and compare a particular quantum physics-based phenomenon to what is experientially relevant for you. I wish to offer you a model of logic that can explain how your consciousness produces the illusion of seemingly smooth, linear time in your daily experience of the apparently material world. Ergo, please consider this a potentially useful analogy more so than an exact explanation of an established science. I just want to make this particular concept relevant in your direct experience. That's all. A very brief summary of quantum mechanics. Before I break down a specific phenomenon within quantum mechanics, I will very briefly summarize what's perhaps the most relevant realization in quantum physics in general. Arguably the most important discovery in quantum mechanics is the principle of wave-particle duality. This breakthrough revealed that supposed matter, such as electrons, exhibits both particle-like and wave-like properties depending on how it's observed, shattering classical physics' rigid categories. It underpins the probabilistic nature of quantum theory, where things are described by wave functions that contain all possible states until measured or observed. Imagine tiny bits of stuff, like electrons, as being both a speck, like a tiny ball, and a ripple, like waves on a pond, at the same time. This wave-particle duality idea says that these bits don't pick or become one or the other until we look at them. Before we check in on them, they're kind of smeared across all possibilities, like a blurry mix of waves, showing every path they might take. But the second we measure or observe them, that blur snaps into one clear outcome, either a speck here or a wave there, as if our observation forces it to decide. It's like the electrons playing every role in a play until the curtain goes up, and our act of watching the show determines its final scene. This discovery flipped how we see the tiny world, showing that what we think of as reality, and what I typically refer to as the illusion, isn't set until we catch it in the act. Path integral formulation. I'll repeat, path integral formulation. A rather technical term, but don't worry, it'll become clear in a minute. Let's attempt to break down Richard Feynman's path integral formulation in simple, everyday language. Imagine you're trying to figure out how something, like a tiny particle, say a photon or electron, gets from one place to another. In our conventional Newtonian macro-phenomenal world, you'd think it would take the shortest, straightest path, like tossing a ball from point A to point B. But in the world of quantum mechanics, it's not that simple. Here's roughly how it works, step by step, according to my limited conceptual understanding. The particle explores every path. Step 1. Picture a particle standing at point A, wanting to get to point B. Instead of picking one obvious route, like a straight line, it's as if the particle says, hey, why not try every possible way to get there? It's like a kid wandering through a park, zigzagging, looping around trees, even taking detours, instead of just walking straight across. In quantum mechanics, the particle doesn't choose one path ahead of time, it considers all possible paths at once, even the crazy, wiggly ones. 2. Each path has a vote. Here's the interesting part. Every path the particle could take gets a little vote on what happens. These votes aren't equal. They're based on something called action. Action is a physics idea that combines energy and time. Paths that take less energy or less time, the efficient ones, get a louder vote, while the wild, wasteful paths, like going in circles or way off course, get a quieter vote. In math terms, each path has a wave attached to it, and these waves have a size or amplitude and a rhythm or phase. The combination of amplitude and phase I typically define and simplify as frequency or vibration. Analogy. Think of these votes like waves in a pond. When you drop a bunch of pebbles, one for each path, into the pond, the ripples spread out and bump into each other. Where the ripples line up, crest meets crest, they get bigger. This is called constructive interference. Where they don't match up, crest meets trough, they cancel out. This is called destructive interference. The path integral describes the most quote-unquote empowered path once all votes are counted or integrated. This is where all the path's waves combine. The lazy or efficient paths, like a straight line, tend to line up and add together, making a big ripple, thus creating the highest probability for that particular path to be taken. The wacky, unlikely paths cancel each other out, so their ripple fades away, thus creating the lowest probability of such outcome. Step 3. The winning path emerges. After all the waves from all the paths mixed together, you're left with one big result. The path or paths that received the most constructive interference or votes and didn't get cancelled out. This is usually the path which required the least action, time and/or energy. The one that's simplest or takes the least effort. Like how in the macro-phenomenal world, a boulder will prefer to roll down the steepest path of a hill, avoiding extra action or resistance. In the end, the particle seems to choose this path, but really it's just where all the votes piled up strongest. I will clarify where I believe choice comes in a bit. 4. It's about probability. The particle doesn't actually travel all those paths in a materialized sense. It exists in a kind of blurry possibility state called superposition until we measure it. When we look, say with a detector, it collapses, so to speak, into one spot, and the path integral tells us the probability of where it will show up. The most likely spot or form of seeming materialization is tied to the least action path, but there's always a tiny chance it could pop up somewhere quote-unquote weird, thanks to those quieter votes. In your experiential practice, these quieter votes symbolize the alternate life choices you could have made instead. That inner whisper to go left instead of right, or change your perspective from a negative one to a positive one, which in my theory would have resulted in a different probability and eventual quote-unquote collapse into materialization. These quieter votes represent other potentials, different states of consciousness you could have embodied instead, which would have led to different physical outcomes or timelines. In my book, the world is ultimately an illusion, which reflects your state of consciousness. Therefore, a change in consciousness will cause a change in the apparent collapse of waves or possibilities into particles. Don't worry if you do. After a brief real-life example of this phenomenon, I will attempt to make this entire concept relevant to your endeavor to free yourself from the illusion of, most specifically, linear time in your direct experience, using a bit of logic as your baseline for really getting it. Real-life example, light bending around a corner. Imagine shining a flashlight at a wall with a small hole. You'd expect light to go straight through, right? But some light bends around the edges. This is called diffraction. The path integral says light explores all paths, straight through, bending slightly, even curving way out. The straight path gets the loudest vote because it's quickest. But the bending paths add up a little too, so you see light spill around the hole. It's like lights playing every option at once, and we just see the winner. In our macro-phenomenal life, meaning the large-scale Newtonian day-to-day experience of the material world as we perceive it, we don't see objects like a car taking every road to the store. But tiny quantum stuff acts like it's everywhere at once until we pin it down by our act of looking at it. Feynman's idea says the universe is secretly juggling infinite possibilities for every move, and what we see is just the option that shouted loudest when all the votes were counted. So, in layman's terms, the path integral formulation is like saying, a particle doesn't just pick one way to go, it tries every way imaginable at the same time. Each way gets a say, and the simplest, easiest one usually wins because the others cancel out. What we end up seeing in our perception is the path that made the most sense, but the particle dreamed up all the rest too. Choice or free will. Vibration determines the state of illusion. Now, although the particle itself does not choose its final path, in my view, choice or free will does play into this manifestation equation and affects the final outcome. And here is why in a nutshell. Because the votes each path receives are based on the state of consciousness of the observer. And thus, consciousness's vibration ultimately determines the most integrated path for the particle to finally respond to, by means of apparent collapse into materialization. As such, your state of being matters, because your state of being determines matter. So, how is this related to choice? Well, you effectively choose your state of being in each moment, whether consciously or unconsciously. You have an overall vibration based on all levels of your consciousness combined, both the conscious and unconscious levels. In very simplified terms, you choose what you believe, and therefore how you feel, and you thus determine the vibration that your observer or consciousness gives off or radiates. But keep in mind that there are higher, less consciously perceived levels to your consciousness as well, which co-determine your overall vibrational output. That's why a shallow change in thinking does not change the location of a perceived mountain, or even why you always seem to attract the same type of problematic partners. This overall vibration is something the probabilities of the illusion of the particles respond to. What determines the loudest vote a particle gets? The particles appear to follow certain choiceless, insentient mechanics such as probabilities. Thus, the process of choosing or deciding which path a particle ultimately takes seems to behave according to inanimate, impersonal physics would demand that they do, since the particles have no will of their own. As such, the particles don't choose where to collapse themselves. I agree with this last statement. Particles don't have a will of their own. However, I claim that you do choose where or how these particles collapse. I claim that you are the determining factor, the caster of votes. Unconsciously so for the most part, but still. And here is where I probably deviate from the currently most commonly agreed upon views within established quantum physics, that the play of probabilities is determined by the vibration of the observer. I believe that your vibrational state affects and thus interferes with the otherwise choiceless probabilistic constructive and destructive interference patterns of the waves and paths of the particles. So although the particle does not choose its path of ultimate collapse, the consciousness that observes this play of probabilities does choose or determine which waves receive the loudest votes, which paths require the least action. Thus, in my view, why some waves are more probable and undergo constructive interference, and thus end up materializing in that spot or state, is therefore not ultimately a random phenomenon or effect based purely on insentient or choiceless mechanics. Rather, it is due to the vibration of its ultimately sentient observer who is doing the measuring. Your entire state of being, your overall vibrational output, affects which path requires the least action on behalf of the particle. The particle then simply follows this highest probability, as if it is obeying an impersonal, seemingly random, physics-based law. This crucial element, that the vibration of the observer determines which paths require the least action, is something which has not yet been fully agreed upon in quantum physics at large. But a similar concept to this has been supported by certain physicists, such as John Wheeler. The missing key ingredient in established quantum physics. I do believe that, ultimately, quantum physicists will come to commonly align their view to the principle that consciousness determines the probabilities of constructive interference and affects the path of least action or resistance on behalf of the particles. I believe this is a missing key ingredient in quantum physics models, which will explain a lot of the mysterious gaps and spooky effects once it receives a more prominent consideration. Thus, I believe that many will come to realize how choice, or free will, is, in fact, involved in the apparent materialization of even our Newtonian macrophenomenal world of seeming objects. Remember that the complex ways in which all of this is structured, and the seemingly impersonal or choiceless laws that such mechanics appear to adhere to, is ultimately all part of the play of an incredibly intelligent, God or intelligence affirming illusion. It is an illusion which appears to be here to serve this source intelligence or creator in its exploration of its inherently infinite potential. Vibrational non-deviation explains the path of least action. This act of awareness, choosing one possible configuration out of infinite possible configurations, roughly equates to what quantum physicists have observed when they describe that a quantum particle, such as a photon, simultaneously explores all possible states and paths between 2 points of collapse. In my model of reality, consciousness is ultimately the only governing factor of experience, and thus every perception is an experiential symbolization of whatever state consciousness takes on. This facilitates learning or evolution in consciousness on behalf of the one infinite creator or source, which I believe is creation's primary reason for appearing to exist, and thus the creator's primary intention for this grand illusion of form, that being learning and evolution. Therefore, the way I would describe this process of a particle's finally chosen point of collapse being the one that required the least action is as follows. The path of least action equals the path which requires the least amount of vibrational deviation from your present frequency or vibration, or state of being. Your vibration is ultimately what instructs what is a particle's path of least action. Crudely stated, if a particular path that a quantum particle could take between observed experience A, or your current moment, and observed experience B, the next moment, if that particular path deviates too much in its amplitude and phase from its observer's vibration, it becomes an unlikely or improbable path or change. Because the particle has no will of its own and listens to consciousness for its instructions. Like attracts like. The vibration of apparent matter matches the vibration of its observer. Ergo, the vibrations of all alternate possibilities, besides the one you end up experiencing, are not a close enough match to the vibration which is being output by you as its observer, thus diminishing the probability of the appearance of drastically different or unexpected materializations between moment A and moment B. As a result, we have what appears to be a logical, consistent, linear, Newtonian, or causal sequence of mostly sensible and quote-unquote logical outcomes. You create your own reality, or illusion, rather. As I explained above, I propose that probability is not a random or insentient external physics-based mechanic. It is reflective of its observer's expectations, beliefs, or simply its overall state of being, and thus its vibrational output. In short, your state of being instructs which timelines receive constructive interference, the louder votes, and which timelines receive destructive interference, the quieter votes. You are constantly casting your vote onto your perceived reality by means of your overall vibrational output. Hence the slogan, "You create your own reality," is a rather literal consciousness physics pertaining statement, not just a vague spiritual sentiment or fluffy slogan. It describes actual physics, whether or not this has been largely agreed upon yet by physicists. Keep in mind, however, that you do not create actual reality. Rather, you create your own illusion within the actual unity basis of reality. For your actual reality, that timeless me within you, cannot be created or uncreated and is never in flux. Only illusion, perception and experience, is in flux. But often when people use the word reality, they point to what is being experienced. However, I do not equate experience to actual reality, but rather to being an illusion of reality.
Massaro University is a vibrant online community dedicated to accelerating your awakening and activating your purpose for the benefit of all. Join live sessions with Bentinho and workshops led by experienced facilitators. Deepen your wisdom, empowerment, and self-knowledge, and experience life-changing shifts week after week. At Massaro University, finding like-hearted seekers is easy and inevitable. Lifelong friendships and a shared purpose fuel profound personal and collective growth. Create your free account today at massaro.university and step into a community that's designed to elevate every aspect of your life.
A brief explanation of miracles. This is a good place to insert a little note on miracles and supernatural phenomena. When an improbable path, meaning unexpected, deviant, or seemingly greater action requiring, does somehow get chosen, its subsequent manifestation in our observed reality contradicts the usually observed path of least action, as we have come to generally expect it to show up in our macro-phenomenal world. Such occurrences are often referred to as miracles. However, from a quantum level understanding of the illusion, these relatively rare occurrences, where quantum particles take an unexpected path, are actually very logical and do not deviate from the underlying consciousness physics of the observer's vibration determining what's most probable. As such, miracles do not technically exist. It is a sentiment or interpretation coming from ignorance of such underlying physics mechanics only. Only probable, meaning typically witnessed at a macro level, and improbable, meaning rarely witnessed at a macro level, differences between collapsed moments of the illusion exist, which in turn are determined by the state of the perceiver, not by random, external to consciousness existing probabilities. If the observer of a particular moment carries within its overall vibrational output a deviant from normal frequency that's loud enough, it affects which probabilities receive the louder votes, which in turn affects the path of least action. As such, a miracle, as viewed from a quantum particle's point of view, is no different than a non-miraculous or normal collapse into form. It still follows the consciousness physics of which path required the least action to manifest. In practical terms, if you believed with enough certainty that you could walk on water, such a feat or materialization would become the most probable, logical, or sensible reality for the particles to assume within your experience. As such, walking on water would not technically be a miracle, but a consciousness physics-based phenomenon that adheres to the same laws of vibration as any mundane, commonly expected collapse of the illusion adheres to. Now, before you go and test this thesis out for yourself, make sure you can swim. In summary, the mechanics of physics are constant in their functioning, but depend on the observer. Once physicists really embrace the fact that consciousness and its vibrational output is a crucial and governing principle in the ways of physics, the gap between natural and supernatural, or linear versus nonlinear, or physics and metaphysics would collapse swiftly. A much more unified theory or model of understanding of the nature of quote-unquote reality which I call the illusion, would quickly emerge from this. So much more would suddenly make sense to us. Okay, end of the first chapter. I hope this makes sense to you guys. If not, then you can ask your questions in the Q&A segment after I finish reading the next chapter. So take a deep breath, recenter yourself if you haven't yet. Forget everything I just said. Trust that you somehow intuitively got the information. You got the principles. You got the illustration. And let's now see specifically how this principle, where the path of least action on behalf of the particle is determined by your vibrational output, how that produces our day-to-day, right now, illusion of this smooth, linear sense of time. Planck time. Oh, sorry, the chapter name, chapter title. The path of least action produces the illusion of linear time. Planck time. That moment between single snapshots of illusion. Imagine you're trying to measure the tiniest possible moment, or tick of the clock, or tick of time. The smallest chunk of time that could ever make sense in the universe. That's what Planck time is. P-L-A-N-C-K. At least theoretically. It's the shortest meaningful moment. So small, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. Planck time, named after physicist Max Planck, who originated this discovery, is about 5.39 times 10 to the minus 44 seconds. To put that into perspective, I'll work on that sentence when I record my book in audio form. To put that into perspective, a second is, well, a second. You're familiar with this sense of the number of frames, or quote-unquote moments, it takes for a second to pass. A billionth of a second is super fast to us. Think camera flash. Planck time is yet way smaller. It's a 1 followed by a decimal point and 43 zeros, then a 5. In plain language, there are about 18.55 quintillion trillion Planck times in a single second. So that's 18.55 quintillion trillion Planck times in a single second. If you could slow down time to watch a single Planck time pass, a regular second would feel like billions of years. Alright, so if you could slow down time to watch a single Planck time pass with your normal human perspective or eyes, a regular second would feel like billions of years. It's the smallest step time can take before it stops making any sense to measure. Keep in mind, it's a theoretical and symbolic figure at the end of the day, especially in the way I am using it here. As such, I'm using the concept of Planck time as a symbol for the tiniest shift in perception, not a literal physics rule. However, let's imagine there is such a mechanically absolute smallest amount of time between the collapse of pure potential into a single path being chosen and the next moment of collapse of infinite potential into manifestation. And let's equate this quote-unquote amount of time between 2 points of collapse to Planck time for illustrative purposes. In this way, we can think of Planck time as the smallest frame in a movie of the universe, or more precisely, as the time it takes to go from a perception of one single frame on the film roll to a visible perception of the next frame on this film roll. If the universe were a movie, Planck time would be the tiniest possible moment between one frame being shown and the next frame being shown. To bring this back to my timeless a warehouse analogy, Planck time here would represent the amount of time it would take to shift consciousness's perspective from one possible configuration, picture or snapshot of reality, of the illusion to the next. So if you were to stand over one of the pictures in this warehouse of infinite possibilities of creation and move over to the next picture on this floor, the amount of time it would take for consciousness to shift from one configuration of reality to the next would be what I loosely equate to the concept of Planck time in this chapter. Potential versus manifest, and the great flickering of illusion. Keep in mind that at this point, and in a few of my assertions before this, I am deviating from established quantum mechanics and am not representing what has been commonly accepted or agreed upon, at least yet. My intent is simply to use some of what has been observed in quantum mechanics, connected to my own realization and experience of reality and how illusion functions, and bridge that combination of knowledge to you in a way that makes it relevant and practicable on your journey. Let's proceed now with more of my own views and experiences. In that amount of time where you are taking your gaze off of one manifest possibility and before you focus awareness on another or the next manifest possibility, in that moment, in that gap, your perceived universe is effectively in a state of potential. This equates to when a particle explores all possible states and paths before it responds to your chosen vibration and collapses into a particular outcome again. In my model of the illusion, thus, the manifest world does not even appear half the time. The world as you perceive it, in my experience, flickers in and out of apparent existence within your consciousness, as it rapidly fluctuates at Planck time speed between potential and manifest states. Much like a light switch being turned on and off quintillions of times per perceived second, or like the pause between one film frame and the next. Yet this gap, or state of potential, often referred to as emptiness in metaphysical teachings, is not consciously experienced by the untrained adept, even though it makes up half of your experience, symbolically speaking. For in truth, both the potential state and the seemingly manifest state are present simultaneously, but that's a topic for a different day. Without flickering, there would be no change. If it wasn't for this break between moments of seeming collapse, snapshots of perceived possible outcomes, there would be no experience of change or motion. For a thing cannot become another thing. And a perceived location, for instance, cannot itself change into another location. The changes in what you perceive actually indicate that you're perceiving different realities or configurations of illusion altogether. As such, every moment is effectively an entirely different or parallel universe. Even if only a single subatomic particle in the entire universe is in a slightly different location or state from the previously perceived configuration of the universe, it is still an entirely distinct configuration of what's possible. Thus, every Planck moment, every quintillion, trillion of a second, you effectively perceive an entirely parallel configuration of the universe. For the previous one cannot change into another one. Change is an interpretation of perception, and thus so is time, which arises due to comparative differences between alternate realities, or frozen, collapsed snapshots of infinite possibility. Analogy. The illusion of time which you experience in a movie aptly also called motion picture, is produced by the light of the projector, representing consciousness, being filtered through frame after frame in close succession. Frame A does not actually change into frame B. They remain distinct, parallel pictures, each in their own right or state. Even if everything depicted in frame A is the same as everything depicted in frame B, but only one atom is in a different state or spot, or the actor's facial expression is different by one atom, frame B is still an entirely different frame from frame A, and contains an entirely different image. The fact that frame B looks almost exactly the same as frame A does not change the mechanical fact that these two frames each contain their own independent universes. Two look-alike universes are still two completely distinct and independent from each other universes. There is no causal connection between them, mechanically speaking. It is only in the eyes of the interpreter that there appears to be a causal relationship between the universe in frame A and the universe in frame B. Consciousness, in this way, connects parallel universes into a subjectively experienced timeline, which appears causal and relational, similar to how you glue together the frames of a movie by means of interpreting what the differences between each frame mean. If you were to slow down this process of the movie being projected to a single frame per second being passed through the light of the projector, your experience of the movie would begin to break down. You would begin to perceive it as a succession of individual frozen frames, of individual frozen pictures or separate realities that you're shifting between. But when you speed it up to 60 frames per second, or even the classic 24 frames per second, you perceive the illusion of motion or change, and thus you can begin to interpret that there is such a thing as time, through which the movie's protagonist travels and moves. And this is, however, a complete illusion when you break it down to its core mechanics. Now imagine that you are shifting your consciousness between parallel realities that typically look very similar to one another due to your vibrational output instructing them to appear as such. At a pace not of 60 frames per second, but of 18.55 quintillion trillion times per second, and you can see how difficult it becomes to see through the illusion of smooth, causal, linear time, as well as the illusion that your experience is based on an externally real, independent from you reality. Consciousness is the thread that strings together parallel realities and gives this sequence of shifts between them a personal and relational meaning, which facilitates reflection. The greater purpose by the Creator for the Creator behind this relational phenomenon and its many derived illusions, which consciousness is empowered to generate, is again learning or evolution. In other words, God is a storyteller. Consciousness, free agents such as yourself, are quote-unquote his team of directors. Does God have a plan? Yes, to learn about itself. Does it have a plan for you? Yes, for you to choose the manner of his learning through you, freely, according to your own directive, creativity, and will, using his infinite intelligence as the source to fuel your journey through the illusion of perception. The path of least resistance explains the illusion of linear time. If your state of experience is constantly switching back and forth between being in a state of pure potential and a state of collapsed perception, which I propose it is, Why then does the next frame of your experience always seem to so closely resemble your previous frame of experience? Why do you not suddenly, from one moment to the next, have 5 purple arms? Why do you not suddenly experience your body in New York City when it was in London just now? Why do you experience seemingly coherent, constant linearity, one foot in front of the other? Why do you experience an object, like your hand, in a location that's only a single Planck length removed from the previous location of your hand? This is due to the path of least action, and thus the highest probability, as we explored in the previous chapter. The observed reality B, which immediately follows up your observed reality A, will be one that is typically most expected. We call this effect linear, because its state of vibration matches most closely with the state of vibration of chosen observed reality A, which in turn was a reflection of the vibration of the observer as it was during moment A's collapse into tangible perception. Ergo, your state of being does not change. If your state of being does not change significantly from moment A to moment B, during the potential state, or that single Planck time between picture A and picture B being perceived, and since the most probable collapse of the particle responds to your vibrational state in each moment, you can expect very little deviant changes or miracles to occur in your perception on a day-to-day basis, between the shape and form of one perceived moment and the next. For it's your state of being that determines what's probable, and thus what requires the least action on the part of the energy of the illusion to seemingly materialize from one activated moment of potential to the next. However, please remember that all possibilities simultaneously exist nevertheless, within timeless reality, and they are explored at and from each point of existence all at once. As such, everything, every path, every state of illusion is interconnected here and now, and in fact, ultimately one. Quote by Tesla: "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." The idea that the reality which ends up finally being observed by you is the one that required the least action between the two states of manifestation, and thus was the most probable one to materialize, if no other force, such as your will altering your vibration, intervened significantly enough, might offer a loosely held quantum physics-based explanation or model as to why your next experience seems to follow so logically, linearly, and causally your previous experience of manifest reality. In practical terms, your next snapshot of infinite possibilities, chosen to be observed within your consciousness, will be a very close representation of your previously chosen moment's configuration of infinite possibilities, provided you don't make a significant quantum leap in your state of being. Hence, we have here the illusion of not just change or motion, but also that of linear time specifically, where what we perceive seems to so very closely resemble what we perceived a nanosecond ago. As a result, time appears to be a real, externally determined phenomenon, but in reality, it is nowhere to be found, except as a sentiment, idea, or imagined concept. Shifting timelines. Going from one picture to the next, and so on, based ultimately on your free will's chosen vibration, produces your unique experience or timeline within the essential timelessness of being. Your perceived reality or life stream will thus naturally appear to follow the easiest path from moment to moment. Your illusion will collapse into a symbolized form that deviates the least from your present vibration, and thus provides your state of consciousness with the most exact match and mirror possible. This happens so you can see yourself reflected in the world of form and symbols, Maya or illusion, provided you have the eyes to make sense of it all. As a result, what you see in the macro world makes logical, causal sense to you. This is why, especially your waking perception of reality seems so linear and externally determined, even though it isn't. Only a significant shift or change in your state of consciousness, vibration, will force your experience timeline to jump to another, significantly different looking and feeling timeline. So unless will, change, transformation, a quantum leap, is applied within your consciousness, as in you change your state of consciousness, raise your frequency or vibration, etc., your life will continue to follow roughly the same patterns and lessons, until you truly learn your current most relevant lessons and make a significant state change within yourself as a result. I will go deeper into the mechanics of timelines and instruct you on how to shift your chosen or perceived timeline in alignment with God's intent for you, your unique calling, relevance, or purpose, in Book 3. Okay, I hope that made sense. And if not, I trust that intuitively it planted a seed and something in you clicked, I'm pretty sure. Much more on my book release will be coming out soon. And it'll be a very thorough manual for enlightenment, understanding the illusion, and how to live a life based on your purpose or calling. I have a few exciting announcements, or one big exciting announcement for you all. Those of you who are adepts will have most likely already caught this news. But for those of you who are watching this stream that are not adepts, for now, we're excited to tell you about an upcoming in-person retreat. So I haven't been teaching in person for quite a few years now. My last real public retreat was in Costa Rica, and it's about 4 years ago. But even before that, I already started slowing down my public events by quite a bit. So it's been a while, but we are going on a tour, mostly through Europe. There might be another mystery location that will open up near the end of this tour, but more on that potentially later. But before we release the whole sort of tour plan to everybody, we have already finalized the Zenith retreat that's part of this tour, meaning Zenith meaning peak or the highest point. So this is a 7-day residential retreat in Croatia. The dates of the retreat are October 13th through 20th. And as of now, you guys can register for this retreat. The theme of this retreat is becoming men and women of God. So again, more on the God Tour later. This is the God Tour, the subtitle for the God Tour, the intention behind the whole God Tour is the direct knowing of God. So we want to invite people also through free, by the people, for the people events to reconsider this whole aspect or concept of a God and make it directly accessible again, to take back their power from both religions, but also from materialism, from atheism, from skepticism, and to really give people direct access to what they truly seek at the end of the day or at the end of their life. And we want to kind of break the mold in this tour. Therefore, most of the events that we'll be hosting are planned to be free events. So this is through sponsorship, this is through donations, and through whatever overflow there is from the tuition of the 1 or 2 events that we do charge for as part of this Scout Tour, including this Zenith retreat, which is more exclusive, requires more organization, and it felt good to charge for this one. But the overflow from those tickets also will go into the manifestation of me being able to visit multiple cities, most likely just in Europe for now, but that can expand, to give free half-day events. So these would be 2 sessions. One would be just me sharing discourse, teaching about direct access to God, the forgotten art of knowing God directly. And then there will be a Q&A segment. So people all around could, at no charge, access a day like this and experience it for themselves, hopefully, and be familiarized with this intention, with this message, with their own freedom, really. Thank you, my friends. No time to you, only love, and may you rejoice in the oneness of your source. Bye.
Thank you for watching this Bentinho live session. Bentinho now hosts these transformative live sessions completely free, offering profound insights and guidance to support your journey. To attend the next live session with Bentinho, simply visit massaro.university and follow the instructions to create your free account.